Good morning to those in western parts of Northern Africa. Salutations to those in between. Welcome. Honorable Chairperson of the AU Advisory Board Against Corruption, Honorable Senabu Inde Diakiti, other board members of the AUABC, our panelists and guest speakers, including Gemay Hartley, Regional Project Officer of PLAF, Mrs. Sunika Nonku, Acting Director, Education and Preventive Division, Financial Crimes Commission of Mauritius, Mr. Apollinaire Mupiganyi, Executive Director of Transparency International, Rwanda, John Namu, Investigative Journalist, Africa Uncensored in Kenya, the Executive Secretary of the AUABC Secretariat, Mrs. Charity Hanene Inchimunya. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's event. As you know, the AU Anti-Corruption Day is celebrated annually on the 11th of July. And today, this webinar is being organized to commemorate the day and to galvanize our thoughts around one aspect of our fight, which we believe is critical under the theme effective whistleblowing protection mechanism, a critical tool in our fight against corruption. And so we are delighted that you could join us across the length and breadth of this continent. And hopefully over the next 2 hours, we will have a very fruitful time engaging around this particular issue. Before we get into the AU anthem, I'll kindly like our colleague, Christopher from the Secretariat, to project the agenda for today. So we have a brief view of what we'll be doing, and then we'll have the anthem, and then the chairperson will take over and provide us with a statement on the African Anti-Corruption Day. Chris, can you kindly project the agenda? Thank you. So over the next 2 hours, we'll be having a statement on the day by our chairperson, Honorable Diakite. Then we'll have a presentation by Mrs. Charity Nchumunya on the AUCPCC and whistleblowing. We'll then proceed to have our keynote speech on the state of whistleblowing in Africa to be delivered by Gemay Hartley, who is the Regional Project Officer, Platform to Protect Whistleblowers in Africa, Southern Africa. Then we'll take a look at the experience of a National Anti-Corruption Authority, Mrs. Sunika Nunku, Acting Director, Education and Preventive Division, FCC of Mauritius, will be speaking. Mr. Apollinaire Mupiganyi will speak on the experience of civil society organizations on whistleblowing. Then we have a presentation by John Namu on the media and whistleblowing. And then we'll have a facilitated Q&A session where those here in the space can ask questions from of our panelists. I'll moderate that, and we'll close with a vote of thanks and the way forward by our chairperson. On that note, once again, very delighted to have all of you, privileged, and we will now get to the AU anthem, and our chairperson will take over. Thank you. Thank you, Honorable Chairperson, your participants and audience.
Merci beaucoup, honorable. Bonjour tout le monde. Bonjour, chers participants. Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs les interprètes. Chers collègues, bonjour. Mesdames et messieurs les membres du Conseil consultatif de l'Union africaine contre la corruption. Mesdames et messieurs les présidents des institutions nationales anticorruption. Mesdames et messieurs les chefs d'organes de recouvrement des avoirs. Monsieur le représentant de Transparency International. Monsieur le représentant du PLAF, Mesdames et Messieurs les représentants des communautés économiques régionales, Mesdames et Messieurs les représentants du secteur privé, de la société civile et des médias, Mesdames et Messieurs les représentants des partenaires techniques et financiers, je veux nommer l'ONUDC, la GIZ, la BAD, l'OCDE, Mesdames et Messieurs les membres du secrétariat du Conseil consultatif de l'Union africaine contre la corruption, chers participants, Mesdames et Messieurs, j'ai l'insigne honneur de m'adresser à vous aujourd'hui en cette occasion solennelle pour célébrer la 8e édition de la Journée africaine de lutte contre la corruption sur le thème Mécanisme de protection des lanceurs d'alerte, outil essentiel dans la lutte contre la corruption. Comme vous le savez, cette journée du 11 juillet marque un tournant décisif dans notre engagement collectif pour une Afrique sans corruption. Mesdames et Messieurs, il y a 20 ans, les États membres de l'Union africaine ont adopté la Convention de l'Union africaine sur la prévention et la lutte contre la corruption. À ce jour, 48 États membres l'ont ratifiée, marquant ainsi leur engagement commun à éradiquer la corruption par des mesures globales telles qu'une législation adéquate, le renforcement des institutions et des programmes de prévention proactifs. Cette convention a joué un rôle important et déterminant dans les efforts de lutte contre la corruption sur l'ensemble du continent, qu'il s'agisse de l'incrimination de la corruption et des pratiques assimilées ou de la création d'institutions dédiées à la lutte contre la corruption. Les 2 dernières décennies ont non seulement mis en exergue les avancées réalisées dans la mise en œuvre de cette convention, mais aussi un certain nombre de défis à relever. Et l'un de ces défis majeurs est l'absence de mécanismes efficaces de protection des lanceurs d'alerte dans les États membres. C'est justement ce qui justifie le choix de ce thème par le Conseil consultatif de l'Union africaine que j'ai l'honneur de présider. Mesdames et Messieurs, vous conviendrez avec moi que la dénonciation est un élément essentiel dans nos efforts de lutte contre la corruption. En effet, l'article 5 du paragraphe 5 de la Convention de l'Union africaine pour la prévention et la lutte contre la corruption exige des États parties qu'ils mettent en œuvre des mesures pour protéger les informateurs et les témoins, notamment en préservant leur identité. En outre, le paragraphe 6 du même article souligne l'importance des procédures qui permettent aux citoyens de dénoncer la corruption sans crainte de représailles. Vous le constatez, les lanceurs d'alerte jouent alors un rôle fondamental et constituent de fervents défenseurs de la transparence et de la responsabilité. Les médias regorgent de récits sur les lanceurs d'alerte confrontés à de graves représailles, ce qui met en évidence une lacune flagrante dans nos cadres de protection. C'est pourquoi il urge d'élaborer et de mettre en place des stratégies efficaces de protection des lanceurs d'alerte par l'adoption d'instruments juridiques et de cadres institutionnels et administratifs pertinents. La présente journée de lutte contre la corruption nous offre une plateforme essentielle pour souligner l'importance de la dénonciation dans la lutte contre la corruption, ce fléau planétaire, et surtout pour engager une réflexion collective sur les bonnes pratiques et les recommandations visant à renforcer la protection des lanceurs d'alerte sur notre continent. Un certain nombre d'États ont enregistré des progrès considérables, il faut le reconnaître, à travers l'adoption de lois et de réglementations visant à encourager et à protéger les lanceurs d'alerte. Toutefois, l'efficacité de ces mesures n'est souvent pas à la hauteur des attentes des populations africaines. L'efficacité du combat pour la protection des lanceurs d'alerte ne doit pas seulement se mesurer par le nombre de lois votées, mais surtout dans la mise en œuvre effective pour une protection réelle de ceux qui ont le courage de dénoncer la corruption. Mesdames et messieurs, la présente journée n'est pas un simple rituel symbolique, c'est un appel fort à l'action. C'est l'occasion pour nous de rallier des soutiens, de mobiliser des ressources et d'inclure toutes les couches de la société dans notre lutte contre la corruption. C'est en évaluant objectivement notre situation actuelle que nous devons tracer une voie plus efficace pour l'avenir. Mesdames et messieurs, la Convention est notre schéma directeur commun. Cependant, la qualité d'un schéma directeur réside dans sa mise en œuvre. Nous devons transcender la rhétorique et nous engager à prendre des mesures concrètes et réalisables pour donner vie aux dispositions de la Convention. Il s'agit notamment de renforcer nos institutions, d'améliorer la coopération entre les agences et de promouvoir une culture de l'intégrité et de la responsabilité. Cela signifie également qu'il faut veiller à ce que nos cadres juridiques ne soient pas seulement en place, mais qu'ils soient solides, dynamiques et capables de s'adapter à de nouveaux défis. Mais surtout, il s'agit de créer un environnement dans lequel chaque citoyen se sent autorisé à dénoncer la corruption, sachant qu'il sera protégé et que ses préoccupations seront prises en compte. Au moment où nous relevons les défis de la protection des lanceurs d'alerte, nous devons reconnaître les obstacles auxquels nous sommes confrontés, à savoir les complexités juridictionnelles, les disparités législatives, l'insuffisance des ressources et parfois le manque de volonté politique, il faut le dire. L'acte de courage de chaque lanceur d'alerte témoigne de la lutte contre la corruption en révélant la vérité cachée et en mettant nue l'injustice. Aujourd'hui, nous nous engageons à soutenir et à protéger ces personnes courageuses, en veillant à ce que leur voix conduise à des changements considérables. J'exhorte alors tous les États membres, les organisations de la société civile, les médias, les organisations internationales, les institutions universitaires et les organismes de recherche à s'unir dans cette mission cruciale qui a également été soulignée lors de la commémoration du 20e anniversaire de la Convention en juillet 2023. La protection des lanceurs d'alerte n'est pas seulement une obligation légale. Il s'agit d'un impératif moral et d'une pierre angulaire dans notre lutte contre la corruption. Mesdames et messieurs, je tiens à vous réitérer mes remerciements pour votre présence à nos côtés aujourd'hui, ce qui témoigne de votre engagement en faveur de cette noble cause. Vos idées, vos expériences et vos contributions sont inestimables dans la mesure où nous travaillons ensemble à l'élaboration de stratégies efficaces pour la protection des lanceurs d'alerte. Je vous souhaite une bonne célébration de la journée et vous remercie de votre aimable attention.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson of the AUABC. Great thoughts on such an important day. We'll now move straight to having the presentation of the AUCPCC, which is the framework within which this becomes important. Mrs. Charity Inchimunya will be speaking to us on that framework and whistleblowing. Mrs. Inchimunya, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair of the session, for giving me the floor. My presentation is being beamed, and I'll quickly go through the presentation, which basically looks at the African Union Convention on Preventing and Combating Corruption and whistleblowing, in keeping with the theme for this year. With respect to the table of contents, I'll first look at briefly the AUCPCC, and then I'll go and look at whistleblowing, and then I'll look at the AUCPCC and whistleblowing, and then a brief look at the status of whistleblower protection in Africa, and then a way forward. So with respect to the African Union Convention on Preventing and Combating Corruption, you note that this is a continent-wide convention that the African Union has set for itself with respect to preventing and combating corruption. And it was adopted in 2003 and came into force in 2006. And therefore, 2024 marks 21 years since the adoption of the AUCPCC. And when you go through the convention, you find that it provides guidelines for prevention and combating of corruption. And to date, we have 48 state parties out of 55 AU member states who are state parties to the convention. The board is still quoting 7 other AU member states so that we can attain universal ratification of the convention. And it is our earnest desire as a collective people engaged in the fight against corruption that all African countries will come within the ambit of the convention. Let me move on, session chair, to whistleblowing and why and the issues surrounding it. Basically, whistleblowing is a process whereby wrongdoing, corruption, or danger in an organization is exposed. And because of this, you find that whistleblowers often face challenges of retaliation, stigma, and physical harm. And because of this, you find that most people are afraid to actually whistleblow because they don't know what will happen. They don't know what will become of them once they are found out that they are the ones who blew the whistle on a certain wrongdoing. So it's only a few actually courageous people on the continent who are willing to risk their all to be able to expose corruption as well as other wrongdoing within various institutions. Let me now quickly move on to the AUCPCC and whistleblowing. And you note that actually the chair in her opening remarks, she already alluded to some of these things. And the convention actually does make provision for the protection of informants. And we find this in Article 5, Sub-Article 5. And basically, you find that the convention is actually broader because it covers informants and other reporting persons. So whistleblowers, by their very nature, are considered as informants, though not all informants can be considered as whistleblowers. So that is a very good, a very key distinction to note. But since the convention in its Article 5.5, Sub-Article 5 is broad, it covers for whistleblowers as well. And when you look at that convention, it calls upon state parties to adopt legislative and other measures to protect informants and witnesses in corruption and related offenses, including the protection of their identity. And then under Sub-Article 6 of Article 5, state parties are also required to adopt measures that ensure citizens report instances of corruption without fear of consequent reprisals. And then under Sub-Article 8 of Article 8, again, state parties are called upon to adopt and strengthen mechanisms for promoting awareness in the fight against corruption. So when you look at these articles, you find that the AUCPCC is actually alive to the fact that whistleblowers face a lot of challenges as they try to report wrongdoing and corruption. And because of this, there must be deliberate measures, there must be deliberate efforts to put in place legislative aspects as well as institutional setups that ensure that citizens or whistleblowers in their respective entities are duly protected should they blow the whistle. This aspect, much as it is not an attractive thing to do and most people shy away from it, you find that it is what exposes corruption. And so we need to encourage people to be able to blow the whistle. Let me now quickly move on to the status of whistleblower protection in Africa. And what we had done as a board earlier this year, we had sent out a questionnaire with various aspects or questions related to whistleblower protection in terms of the institutional setups, the legislative measures in place, and other policies that have been put in place to ensure that whistleblowers are protected. And so we sent this questionnaire to our member states through their national anti-corruption agencies. And so far, we haven't received all of them, but there are a few that we've been able to receive and have a look at. We are still appealing to our member states to be able to send the responses as and when they can. So with respect to other international mechanisms or tools that are available with respect to whistleblower protection, we find that we have the Arab Convention Against Corruption. Then we also have the African Union Convention on Preventing and Combating Corruption that I've already alluded to. Then we have at the global level, the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. In West Africa, we have the ECOWAS protocol on the fight against corruption. Whilst the southern region, they have the SADC protocol against corruption. And when it comes to laws and policies on whistleblower protection in AU member states, we find that most AU member states do not have standalone laws or policies on whistleblower protection. However, most of them, they have provisions within the already existing laws on whistleblower protection. And there are others still in the process of trying to enact these laws. And you find that actually some member states even have some institutional setups, such as witness protection units, and that are able to offer the needed support to whistleblowers. But overall on the continent, I think a lot more still needs to be done to ensure that we have strong laws, including standalone laws that ensure protection for whistleblowers. Let me now very quickly move on as I continue on the status of whistleblower protection in Africa, and perhaps just look at some challenges in whistleblower protection. And these, again, let me hasten to say that we got them from some of the responses that have already been received from the questionnaires that were sent by member states. So one of the key challenges to effective whistleblower protection on the African continent is a lack of political will by member states. And you find that sometimes the pronouncements are made to the effect that whistleblowers should be protected and all, But when it comes to actual implementation on the ground, perhaps the institutions that are charged with offering whistleblower protection are not given the necessary resources to be able to carry out their work. And then another aspect or another challenge of whistleblower protection is the inadequacy of the existing laws to protect whistleblowers. Whistleblower protection is not an easy undertaking. It's not a cheap undertaking. It requires a lot of robust laws that are responsive to the situation on the ground. And if those laws are not available, it becomes difficult for the member states to implement effective whistleblower protection laws. And then the other challenge is lack of capacity by institutions to promote whistleblowing. I already alluded to this a while ago. Sometimes it's because the resources availed to these institutions is simply not sufficient to enable them do an effective work with respect to promoting whistleblowing. And the next item is the same in terms of inadequate resources. And then we also have the aspect of lack of independence of prosecuting, investigating bodies, as well as other institutions that are charged with whistleblowing. And then there are also aspects of...
So I'm going to ask Mrs. Nchimunya to kindly try and wrap up. I'll give you a minute. Especially since the next speaker is also taking the status of whistleblowing in Africa. So I don't know how many more slides, if you can just try and wrap up for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Session Chair. I'm concluding. Actually, there's just one more slide I need to speak to on the way forward. And basically, it's just a call to member states to consider implementing and developing deliberate laws on whistleblower protection, especially for those that do not have anything yet. It is imperative that there are effective laws in member states to ensure protection of whistleblowers. And then the other aspect, as a way forward, we are calling upon member states to also consider developing public awareness programs to inform whistleblowers about their rights. And then finally, we are calling upon member states to consider implementation of anonymous reporting systems on corruption and related cases. And this is very key so that people are free forward and report suspected cases of corruption. That, in a nutshell, Session Chair, is what I had to present with respect to the AUCPCC and whistleblowing. I thank you very much.
And thank you so much, Mrs. Nchimunya. So the context has been established. The framework with which we are working does have sections, Articles 55, 56, 58, that cover this area of whistleblowing and makes proposals on what nation states ought to be doing in order to protect the various actors in the space. Now we come to a very crucial part of our webinar today, and I'll be inviting our keynote speaker in the person of Gemma Hartley, who is the Regional Project Officer, Platform to Protect Whistleblowers in Africa and Southern Africa. We are so grateful to have you, and ball in your court, your audience.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. First, I'd like to express my gratitude for the opportunity to address you today on the state of whistleblowing in Africa. It's a matter of such critical importance, as we know. In recent years, whistleblowers have emerged as indispensable agents of change, bravely stepping forward to expose corruption, malpractice, and wrongdoing across various sectors. Their actions not only uphold transparency and accountability, but also play a pivotal role in fostering good governance and sustainable development. To begin with, I'd like to give a brief overview of PLAF and our work. PLAF was established in 2017 to support whistleblowers whose disclosures speak to the African public interest and ensure that these disclosures have greater impact. We recognize access to information and justice as the cornerstones of democracy. And so our mission is to protect and support those who expose wrongdoing across the continent. Our work thus focuses on 3 pillars. The first is the actual protection of whistleblowers, including safety and security, legal support, and media guidance. We aim to ensure that those who witness wrongdoing can disclose this information without retaliation. The second pillar focuses on the impact of disclosures by developing strategies to ensure that their stories are heard, that justice is sought, and that the systems that initially allowed such wrongdoing are improved. In doing so, we work hand in hand with the media and authorities and act as a shield between them and the whistleblower. Finally, recognizing that supporting whistleblowers and fighting corruption cannot be done alone, we focus on outreach, education, and capacity building to ensure our actions can be duplicated by others like NGOs and the media to have a kind of snowballing effect. PLAF has worked with whistleblowers across the continent, and drawing from our experiences, today I'm going to provide a brief overview of whistleblowing in Africa, some of the challenges we face, and how we can move forward to ensure stronger protection. So first, why is whistleblowing important? Simply, whistleblowers actively resist the complacency that allows corruption to thrive. Their disclosures shed light on issues that impact society at large, from the misappropriation of public funds to environmental degradation and human rights abuses. Whistleblowers consistently save us money, aid the recovery of assets, and if properly supported, prompt reforms that bolster transparency, strengthen institutions, and restore public trust. From our work alone, we have witnessed how whistleblowing results in systemic change and to varying degrees brings those responsible to account. In South Africa, PLAF represented and protected key state capture whistleblowers who ultimately helped create the Zondo Commission, which led to former President Jacob Zuma's resignation. We worked with the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists on the Luanda leaks in Angola, which found millions of dollars were channeled through a number of companies for the benefit of former Angolan president and his family. And then in the DRC, we supported the Congo holdup investigations that exposed in detail the ploys used by BGFI Bank and its clients to cover up endemic corruption and kleptocracy under Joseph Kabila's rule. These investigations and their positive results were all sparked or sustained by whistleblowers. And yet, across Africa, whistleblowers are all too often left entirely on their own. Disclosures bring with them an array of risks, including civil and criminal cases, physical intimidation, relocation, financial destitution, and emotional turmoil. PLAF supports whistleblowers to navigate and reduce these risks. In one case in the DRC, we supported whistleblowers Grady Coco and Navi Malela. The 2 whistleblowers uncovered dodgy dealings despite US sanctions against the implicated mining magnate Dan Gertler. Simply doing their job meant blowing the whistle. And as a result, they were ultimately forced to flee their home country. Shockingly, Grady and Navi were eventually sentenced to death. Although this is an extreme case, retaliation is particularly risky when disclosures implicate those who govern or those with deep pockets. So when we consider the state of whistleblowing in Africa, we need to be cognizant of these risks as well. On this day, as we celebrate African Anti-Corruption Day, it's important to remember that since the adoption of the African Union Convention on Preventing and Combating Corruption, signatory states have undertaken to put in place measures to combat corruption, such as criminalizing it through various laws, creating institutions, and engaging in initiatives to prevent it. But only about a dozen of the 55 countries that make up the African Union have specific laws protecting whistleblowers. These countries are mainly in sub-Saharan Africa and are English-speaking, with the exception of Tunisia. A key part of PLAF's work includes publishing country reports on the state of whistleblowing across the continent and supporting the development of stronger legislation. We found that even in countries with specific legislation, there are still significant gaps rendering whistleblowers vulnerable. Positively, though, more and more countries in Africa are seeking to develop or reinforce whistleblower protection, but legislation needs to be enabling and supportive. Protection also requires laws against financial crimes and laws guaranteeing freedom of expression and access to information. This ensures a multifaceted approach and that disclosures can be properly investigated to act as a catalyst for change. So great strides are being made, with some countries like Ghana and South Africa having relatively strong frameworks. But even with strong legislation, the application leaves a lot to be desired. And we still see whistleblowers facing victimization. A recent case in South Africa, for example, saw Babita Deokaran, a whistleblower, murdered for reporting corruption at the local Department of Health where she worked. This shows that legislation alone is not enough. Beyond this, whistleblowing also faces a number of other challenges that have already been touched on, but these include things like stigma, being labeled as snitches, and a general lack of awareness around what whistleblowing actually constitutes and how to blow the whistle safely. Another issue that even in countries with slightly stronger frameworks, institutions tasked with enforcing protection may be weakened. If we want to effectively encourage transparency and accountability, then the institutions tasked with safeguarding this need to be strengthened. So progress is still being made. And as we continue to advance whistleblowing in Africa, we must foster a culture that values transparency and integrity at all levels of society. And a key part of this is collaboration. We must collaborate as civil society, government, and international partners to ensure robust support mechanisms for whistleblowers. And across the continent, we are seeing great strength and strides being made using these collaborative approaches. But there's no silver bullet. Whistleblowing functions within an ecosystem that itself needs to be strengthened. Civil society, the media, and authorities across the world often lack the resources and expertise to properly act on the information whistleblowers provide, leaving the public in the dark. To empower the public, essentially our whistleblowers in waiting, we must strengthen this ecosystem. As I mentioned before, if we draw on each other's strengths and build each other's capacity, our successes will ultimately snowball. Along with collaboration, the integration of clauses into regional and continental-wide agreements to reinforce whistleblower protection is also vital. The development of model legislation on whistleblowing for AU member states is thus not just an exciting prospect, but a necessary one. In closing, today, as we take stock, we must unequivocally demand that whistleblowers are protected, that those who victimize them are held to account, and reaffirm our commitment to act on the information that they provide, not in isolation, but by working together. Thank you for your attention.
And thank you too. Thank you too. Thank you for doing that. Plenty of content. I'm hoping that we'll have access to the slides or whichever notes you were referring to. Try to help a lot of us. Collaboration is key. Integration of clauses that protect whistleblowers into various frameworks is also important, amongst other things. Thank you so much, Gemma. We now move on. We will hear the experience of a national anti-corruption authority relating to whistleblowing. And we are privileged to have Mrs. Sanika Nunku, Acting Director, Education and Preventive Division, Financial Crimes Commission of Mauritius. If you're here, please, your audience would like to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Session Chair. I have a PowerPoint presentation. May I share the slides, please?
Yes, please. Our colleague Chris Katu, kindly enable Mrs. Seneca Nunku.
She can share.
All right.
Okay.
Looks like your audio is off. Can you put
Yeah.
your audio back on? Yeah, and then start
Yeah.
again. Thank you.
Yes, in the meantime that I manage to share my screen, yeah, the aim of our presentation is to share the experience of a national anti-corruption agency on whistleblowing. And before I proceed, good morning and good afternoon to all of you. And I wish to touch upon, just a second. Can you help here? I'm sorry for this technical issue. Okay, can you see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Okay,
can
thank
you
you.
move it to presentation? Can it be moved to presentation? Great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yes. I wish to touch upon the importance of whistleblowing for anti-corruption agencies. Why is it important? And talk about the new regulatory framework in Mauritius and the protection offered, reporting channels, and safeguard offered to whistleblowers and to informers and witnesses, rather, and discuss about challenges and the way forward. Now, we are talking about whistleblowing. What is whistleblowing? A definition has been stated earlier. It is generally defined as a person who reports wrongdoing or malpractices in public interest. Now, why is whistleblowing important to an anti-corruption agency? It is important for a number of reasons. First, it allows for early detection of corruption. Whistleblowers have a direct knowledge of corrupt activities and can provide early warnings to ACAs about potential wrongdoing. It is a source of insider information. Whistleblowers are in a position to provide detailed and specific information about what is ongoing. It has a deterrent effect. Well-handled whistleblower reports can deter others from engaging in corrupt activities. It promotes public trust, confidence, and promote an ethical culture. A robust whistleblower protection and management system enhances public trust and fosters a culture where ethical behavior is valued and misconduct not tolerated, and promotes accountability and transparency, as it can enhance the effectiveness of anti-corruption measures used by insider knowledge. Now, for us anti-corruption agencies, whistleblowing is considered as a vital tool for combating corruption and other financial crimes. But before I share the Mauritian experience, allow me to share with participants the new regulatory framework in Mauritius. In fact, there has been a major legal and institutional reform to fight financial crimes in Mauritius with a proclamation of the Financial Crimes Commission Act in 2000, the Financial Crimes Commission Act 2003, which was proclaimed in March this year, March 2024. And this particular act, under this particular act, 3 agencies, that is the Independent Commission Against Corruption, the Integrity Reporting Services Agency, and the Asset Recovery Investigation Division of the Financial Intelligence Unit, have come together as one institution called the Financial Crimes Institution. And the Financial Crimes Institution is the lead national agency responsible for detecting, investigating, and prosecuting what we call financial crimes. Now, what do we understand by financial crimes? financial crimes is not limited to corruption offences and includes foreign bribery, money laundering offences, fraud offences, and financing of drug dealing. It also looked at accumulation of unjustified wealth and other ancillary offences. With this particular act, the Financial Crimes Commission has enhanced functions as it has powers to investigate, to look at asset recovery and also unexplained wealth. This particular act makes provision regarding whistleblowing. This particular act makes provision for reporting of financial crimes, that is, the other forms of financial crime I just mentioned, money laundering, fraud offences, financing of drug dealing, and not only limited to corruption offences. It provides for the protection of and assistance to informers and witnesses in line with international best practices for protection of whistleblowers. What I mean here is that the provisions of the Act is in line with the provisions of the UNCAC, the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, and also in line with the provisions of the African Union Convention for Preventing and Combating Corruption. And this particular act also introduces what we call a witness protection scheme to assist endangered persons. These are the provisions of the new legislation in Mauritius. Now, how do we encourage whistleblowing? How does it happen on the ground? We have different channels to report financial crimes. The various channels are, you can come in person to the Financial Crimes Commission. There is a dedicated unit set up at the Financial Crimes Commission known as the Complaints and Advice Processing Unit, which register a person's complaint. Somebody can come in person. They can call the Complaints and Advice Processing Unit to denounce wrongdoing, corruption, and other financial crime. They can use our hotline. Denunciation, reporting can be made through anonymous letters or even signed letters, emails, and referrals from other public bodies. It can be done through the FCC website, that is the organization's website, and through social media, including Facebook. You can report an act of corruption and other financial crimes. And officers of the FCC will contact the person making the report for more information. Now, what is there under the legislation? The legislation provides for the protection of the identity of the informer and ensure confidentiality of the information provided by the informer throughout the process. Our law also provides for anonymous reporting. That is, people can make anonymous denunciation to the Financial Crimes Commission. And here, I must say that around 50% of our yearly complaints represent anonymous complaints. There are also safeguards for witnesses, in the sense that witnesses are protected against victimization. And what is victimization? There is a definition under the Financial Crimes Commission Act. Challenges and the way forward. Okay, the law provides for this is very new. I mentioned earlier that the Financial Crimes Commission Act was proclaimed in late March this year, and it provides for the development and implementation of a witness protection scheme to protect what we call endangered persons. And the law does provide for a definition of what we call endangered persons. And our challenge here, our task here, is to come up with this, to develop this witness protection scheme. And here we're seeking the collaboration of international partners, such as the UNODC, to develop an effective witness protection scheme. Other challenge that we face, there is this fear of reprisal there is this fear to come forward to report financial crimes, and to tackle this particular issue. The Education and Preventive Division of the Financial Crimes Commission conduct awareness session about, reporting about what are financial offenses, channels to report financial crime offenses, and also what are the protection offered, and reassure the public about coming forward to report financial crimes offenses. So regular awareness session, regular sessions, education sessions are conducted on these particular issues so as to encourage people to come forward and report financial crime offenses. What we propose as a way forward, given that whistleblowing is an important tool, is an important measure to detect wrongdoing at an early stage, and it is an important tool for anti-corruption agencies. A proposal is to come up with a common platform to address challenges, to address risk in relation to whistleblowing, so that we can come together to find common solutions to our problem. I thank you for your attention, and I'm available for suggestions and questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Plenty to wrap our minds around, and I think you made it in good time as well. Key issue, it is important for us to have whistleblowers in order to have early detection. Prevention is always better than prosecution and running around. And if we can work together to come up with models that work, that would be great. Thank you so much for your delivery. We now go on to the experience of a civil society organization. And mind you, each panelist, each presenter has 10 minutes. After the next two, we'll then have an open session where we can ask questions, engage with our speakers, make suggestions, and move on. At this point, I would like to ask our friend, colleague, Mr. Apollinaire Impugenyi from Transparency International Rwanda, who will be speaking on the experience of civil society organizations on whistleblowing, to make his presentation. Apollinaire, if you can tilt your camera a little forward so we get a better shot. Great. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you. Can I share my presentation? I'm trying to share.
Yeah, Chris, please enable Mr. Mopigani.
Yes, he's able to share. Thank you.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you too.
Yeah. Thank you, Session Chair, Honorable Chair, African Union Advisory Board on Corruption, Honorable members of African Union Advisory Board on Corruption, distinguished guests, all protocol observed. Good morning, good afternoon, depending where you are. As introduced, I'm Apollinaire. I'm speaking on behalf of Transparency International, our global movement, and of course on behalf of my colleague Paul, who was supposed to be the speaker in this session and who could not make it. First and foremost, Transparency International recognizes the good partnership with the African Union Advisory Board on Corruption and the African Union as a whole. And we thank you for having invited us to be part in this important reflection today. As I can tell you, the whole movement, especially African chapters, now are busy to disseminate awareness message on this day and the fighting corruption in general. And I command the selection of the topic of this year, whistleblower protection. This is a very important topic because we can't fight corruption without information. And the whistleblowers are the source of information we need. It's really a very strong tool to fight corruption. But as previous speakers mentioned, there are some prerequisites to be effective, to be the whistleblower, to be effective. Among others, they were mentioned, the political will. It's very, very important. Of course, having other complementary legislation, including the anti-corruption agencies, the anti-corruption laws, civil society participation in the media, to name it but a few. But when we talk about whistleblower, I think I don't want to repeat what others said, but I want to probably to emphasize the understanding of Transparency International. A whistleblower is a disclosure of information related to corruption, illegal, fraudulent, and hazardous activities being committed in or by a private sector, including even civil society. So this definition, other speakers mentioned it. And as I said, the prerequisite for effective the legal framework important. And we praise that the continent, our countries, and of course the global have consider corruption as a threat to economic development, good governance, and so forth. So we have various anti-corruption instruments. The convention, the one that is guiding our anti-corruption fight is more particularly the African Union Convention Preventing and Combating Corruption, supported by other international instruments, UNICAC, and of course, OECD Convention. So I think another element that I want to mention, despite the importance of whistleblower as anti-corruption tool, other speakers mentioned how African countries are really lagging behind in enacting such laws. And even in the countries where they do exist, we are seeing the gaps that could support the whistleblower to contribute to the fight against corruption. I don't want really to repeat what is presented in front of you, but the slide shows how we are really lagging behind. Some countries do not have even the law protecting whistleblowers. Others are somehow merging the protection in other laws, but we can recognize or praise some countries, Uganda, Tanzania, South Africa, Rwanda, Botswana, and Namibia, Ghana, Zambia, and Mozambique for having a specific law. In Rwanda, the law is under review, and the Transparency International Rwanda, we are trying to contribute to see how it can be aligned to the protection of whistleblower more particularly. So the first speakers as well mentioned the importance of whistleblower in the fight against corruption. There are many, but as presented to you, it's a detection of corruption. A whistleblower is embedded in the institution or has information on the corruption case. So very easy to provide information to law enforcement institution. It's a deterrence tool, protection of public resources, enhancing organizational culture, because people will feel that integrity is the role model to follow instead of me being involved in corruption practices, because they will fear that someone could whistle the blower. So we have from the OECD some mechanism or some institutional framework that can support the whistleblower to play an effective role in fighting corruption. I will not spend more time on this, but I want to really to share Transparency International experience. Our movement in the beginning was elitist movement where we were advocating at the top. We were somehow convinced that if we managed to talk to the high level, the changes will follow. But we found that the victims of corruption are the one who has the sustainable solution. We initiated a project known as ALAC, Advocacy and Legal Advocacy Center. It's a whistleblower center where we receive victims or witnesses of corruption. As you can see, more than 320,000 clients came at various Transparency International offices in more than 100 offices opened. Just to give you an example, in Rwanda, since we started the ALAC, we have received more than 70,000 cases, people who come to us to report. Very few of them are reporting on cases which are not connected to them, but we are happy to put on our credit that all those cases are jointly dealt with the anti-corruption institutions, the Office of Ombudsman, the Rwanda Investigation Bureau. Some perpetrators on issue of corruption, sexual corruption, misuse of public funds are arrested thanks to Transparency International collaboration with the law enforcement institution, more particularly here in Rwanda. There are many challenges, as they have been mentioned by the previous speakers. Issue of retaliation, it's really the main risk that the whistleblowers push them to refrain to whistle the blower. If we look to the Afrobarometer report, we see that in many countries, it's more than 70%. Some countries on 70%, for example, in Liberia and other countries, whistleblowers fear to report due to retaliation. And of course, there is another aspect of stigma. We know, for example, in some areas, we were witnessing a case here in Rwanda where a citizen who whistled the blower, a local leader told him, please, you are saying a lot, leave our village. Those are examples that leave some whistleblowers. This is make the whistleblower whistleblowing very slow, very little, or the number of whistleblowers very, very low. And this is shown by a regional research conducted by Transparency International, Uganda, Burundi, Kenya, Rwanda, Tanzania, where we see the level for reporting is very, very low due to those issues of retaliation, stigma, exclusion, and even being prevented to get basic services as ordinary citizens. So the recommendation, I think what is important, the takeaway is we need to put in place strong registration to protect the whistleblowers. And of course, we need to connect with other existing mechanisms, the media, for example, and of course, collaboration with the law enforcement institutions, civil society to contribute in the monitoring. We are seeing the experience of ALAC in Africa shows that citizens are trusting civil society, because when they come, we are really giving them time. But when there is collaboration between civil society and the public institutions, it becomes effective. The experience of Rwanda and other ALAC countries is really a good example. Of course, access to information is very key. The institutional frameworks, even the countries who have the whistleblower protection laws, they need to be really strengthened and improved to make sure that a whistleblower is not retaliated or affected after whistleblowing. Promote regional cooperation, monitor and evaluate. Of course, it's very important, but more importantly, again, keep the public education campaign. So stopping here because time is very limited, but in a nutshell, it's possible to promote whistleblowers by putting in place some user-friendly tool, and the example of Transparency International through ALAC project is a case study, an example to emulate, especially in the countries where ALAC are operating. Thank you, Chair of the session, and the Honorable Chair of the African Union Advisory Board for giving us this this opportunity. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Mr. Mupiganyi, Executive Director, Transparency International Rwanda, for this very detailed update from your end. It's been presentation starting with our chairperson, Honorable Diakite, giving the statement on the African Anti-Corruption Day, followed by the AUCPCC, the framework, our continental framework, and whistleblowing by Mrs. Charity Chuminya. And then we had our keynote speech by Gema May Hartley, Regional Project Officer for PLAF. Then we had the experience of a National Anti-Corruption Authority by Mrs. Sunika Nunku, Acting Director, Education and Preventive Division for the FCC Mauritius. And we just wrapped up with Mr. Apollinaire Mupiganyi, Executive Director of Transparency International Rwanda. We were hoping to have a presentation on media and whistleblowing by Mr. John Namu, an investigative journalist from Kenya, but that's not going to be possible. So at this point, we will proceed to our Q&A session, and I'm hoping that we can do that over the next 30, 40 minutes and then wind down. So we do have some questions already in the chat box. I will take the first three, distribute them, and then after that, ask Chris whether we can take submissions from the audience, take maybe three, and then come back to the chat box. Let's see how much we can cover over the next 40 minutes maximum. So the first question I'm going to pick, and I'm going to take it and give it to our keynote speaker. How can African media outlets contribute to safeguarding whistleblowers and amplifying their voice? And I would like our keynote speaker to consider that. Let me give the first three before I let you respond to it. So the first one we'll be looking at is how African media outlets can contribute to safeguarding our whistleblowers and at the same time amplifying their voices. So a safe space. And the second one, what challenges do whistleblowers in Africa have or face that are unique in comparison to other regions? And I'll be asking our colleague from Transparency International Rwanda, Mr. Mupiganyi, to kindly take up that particular question on, are there any unique differences in terms of the challenges confronting whistleblowers in Africa when you look at other jurisdictions? And then we'll take a look at how can technology and digital platforms be leveraged to provide secure channels for whistleblowers. Is there a way we can do that? I will ask our colleague from the Secretariat, Mr. Chris Kato, to think about that, even as he manages our platform today, and share. If there are any other technology people here, you can also tell us, how can we leverage technology, digital platforms to provide more security for our whistleblowers? On that note, I hand over to Gema May. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's a very, very important question, the role of the media in providing safety and amplifying the disclosures. And it's one that as PLAF, we grapple with a lot, and we work very closely with the media for this reason. The media, whether that's local or international, plays a huge role in terms of creating impact around the stories and ultimately in securing safety for whistleblowers. Each case is unique. And so you sometimes need to weigh up, if this whistleblower wants to go public or not, and how best to do that. But sometimes there are situations where, for the sake of safety and security, being known as a whistleblower and having the revelations out there in the public is actually a safety mechanism. So in that way, the media play a huge role in safeguarding whistleblowers themselves. but then equally in amplifying their voices, whether that's investigative journalists taking the initial information and really digging into it, and uncovering the case as it's in its entirety and making that accessible then for the public. That's really where that kind of catalyst for change comes from. We want the public to be aware of what is happening in their countries. And to do that, it's important that they have access to this information. So the media play this kind of dual role of increasing the impact of these stories and the disclosures, but also of protecting the whistleblowers. It's important, though, to keep in mind as well that sometimes whistleblowers within that relationship with the media also need additional protection. So that's, again, something that PLAF does, where we will act as a shield between the two to make sure if it's, for example, an anonymous whistleblower, that their anonymity as best as possible is maintained, to make sure that the integrity of their story and their experience is maintained as well, and that they aren't just treated as another source. There's something different between a whistleblower and a mere source. So the media play a really, really important role. And I think one of the questions later also was asking specifically about when the media uncover corruption and the state doesn't act on this, what advice is there for the media in that regard? And again, it's that they apply pressure, and so it might be that we move to look at different ways of applying pressure on the state with international media and so on. So in short, the media play a very essential role, and also experience retaliation and also experience threats when they are dealing with whistleblower stories. And so there's capacity building needed there and increased protection and legislation for that as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Gemma, for taking that up, and also for taking up the additional question on what do we do when investigative journalists expose grand corruption. Thank you for looking at that as well. I will now ask Mr. Mupiganye to take up the second question for us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Session Chair, and thank you for the question.
I think your camera, can you tilt your screen a little forward that?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, my response is that I think whistleblowers face the same challenges in an environment where the legal and institutional framework are not effective. This can be in Africa, in Europe, in America, everywhere, all over the world, especially when our experience is that the threats for whistleblowers comes from individuals, those who are involved in organized crimes. We heard some cases of death, for example, in Latin America, of some whistleblowers who were killed due to reporting, let's say, narco trafficking, drug trafficking. We hear whistleblowers killed everywhere. So I think what's matter is more the institutional and the legal framework at national level, which is probably the shield for whistleblowers to operate in an environment somehow which provides some little protection. Otherwise, as it has been repeated, whistleblowers, they take the risk to report on the course of losing their life. This is probably the response that I can give, as long as the environment is not providing enough protection in terms of legal, institutional, and of course the safe house for them when they are threatened. Thank you.
Thank you. So you are not aware that there's any unique challenge per se that whistleblowers in Africa are being exposed to compared to other continents? Mr. Mupigani, just a quick question. So at the moment, your data doesn't show us that there is any distinct difference between Africa and other continents, or it's something that we need to research into?
Yeah, I think as I said, we have environment that really provides safeguard for whistleblowers in Africa. We know some countries with whistleblower protection laws and others. But we are aware that whistleblowers, they whistle the blower on corruption being a crime, and it involves a person. So those people who are powerful, they can be a network of organized crime. Those people are the ones who are threatening you. So I can't really say in our working environment in Africa, we are more exposed compared to, let's say, in Colombia, where there is, let's say, drug trafficking, or in other countries where there is organized crime at the high level. So I think doing whistleblowing, it's a risk as a work, including what we do as anti-corruption activists. So, but this depends to the environment, and I can't really blame or say Africa, we are more on high risk compared to other countries.
I think, thank you very much. Point well made. So then we move to Mr. Chris Kato. Chris, are you able to talk to us about whether there are some ways in which we can leverage, technology and digital platforms to, as it were, provide more security to whistleblowers? And I see there's a follow-up question, similar one relating to AI, block technology. Is there anything we can do that makes it more secure for whistleblowers?
Thank you very much, Honorable Kwame, and thank you for this opportunity. As we are aware, there is the digital space in Africa is growing at a very high fast speed, and at the same time, it poses a lot of challenge, especially for people who want to expose some wrongdoings in the government or high places that may be. But in such, the people have come up with ways on how they can conceal themselves and try to protect themselves, especially when they are touching on high volatile issues that range from corruption to other misdeeds in the society. And one of the issues that I was thinking about when the question came up was about remote reporting, whereby whistleblowers can be able to consolidate their evidence and share them with a remote person offshore, and then they task that person with reporting, so that when in terms of tracing, it becomes easy, not easy for this person, because as we know that we're operating from different environments. Some environments are harsh, some environments are cruel for people who want to, expose such a things like this. The other way that can work is concealing the IP addresses that the whistleblower is using, so that you are not able to be tracked or to be traced by maybe the people who don't want this information to go out. Another aspect that can be considered is what we call virtual private networks that will be able to protect the person from the public, and this can go a long way in ensuring that the privacy of this person is guaranteed. And of course, we can also touch on the issue of using proxies. I think that's what I started with. And another way is maybe use of a public Wi-Fi that it's if maybe you are reporting from a public area, it may not be easy for you to be tracked. So I think these are some of the things that came into my mind when the question was posed. Thank you. I submit.
And thank you too, Chris. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. Now, I'm going to ask you to give opportunity to a few people in our audience today to speak. We'll pick maybe 3 of them. Before we do that, let me share 2, 3 more questions for some people I'd like to speak to respond to some of the questions. The first that I'm picking from the chat box, and I'm going to target Mrs. Sunika Nunku of FCC Mauritius, since you are the Director, Education and Preventive Division. I have a question here on how do we get the large African rural populace to be actively aware and participate in whistleblowing? Are there specific activities, you can skip the AUAB or success stories by any national anti-corruption bodies that include and focus on rural people in whistleblowing? This is by Maxwell Pegbasan-Quire, a policy analyst with the Global Financial Integrity in Ghana. So I'll ask Mrs. Sunika Nunku to take a look at that, so you prepare for that. I also want to jump to the young people. I have a question here from Bright Ofori on how would you rate young people's attitude towards corruption and the fight against corruption? I'll ask Mrs. Charity Inchimunya to look at that. And then I'll ask our board chair to look at how is the African Union and AUABC doing specially to draw young people towards the fight against corruption. And then he goes on to say that the United Nations, through the UNODC, the EU, and other bodies are making special initiatives aimed at seeking ideas from young people. And they have established youth advisory boards as part of their efforts. Is this something that we should be thinking about? By Tofori, Executive Director, the Bright Future Alliance. I picked those 3, and you can be thinking about your questions. Chris, can we pick 3 people from our audience? So I see some hands up. Do you want me to call something?
Yes, we have David.
Good.
No, sorry, Dr. Patricia Achan from Uganda.
Okay.
Kindly, just a minute, I'm trying to, I've allowed you to talk. Kindly unmute and then you post your question.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank the AUBC, first of all, for organizing this meeting as we commemorate the Africa Anti-Corruption Day. My questions are basically 2. One is on the dual personalities of corruption perpetrators in vis-a-vis the whistleblower protection in order to fight corruption. Because when you look at away from the scene of crime, perpetrators of corruption are normally looking like very good people. They provide luxuries. Like now you see politicians, comfort, they fundraise, they go to church. In their families, they are also extremely good people. But to the ordinary man in these communities, the corrupt normally look like they're very, very generous, and yet they are criminals behind there. How do we then get to deal with these dual personalities? Because the actual victim of corruption, who when they go to hospital and find drugs stolen or travel in poor roads, have buildings which are collapsing, basically are blinded to praise the perpetrator. And now when you look at the work of the anti-corruption agencies, I work as Deputy Inspector General of Government in Uganda. Our work becomes very difficult because even when you get to investigate and arrest them or even take them for prosecution, the very communities and families in which they are the champions behind rally against us and they're like, no, this is a good person, please let him free, and so on. So this unfortunate paradox is because the scene of crime is far away from their communities and the family members. Then on the other hand, moving to their scene of crime where there is no law enforcement agency, you find that there will be colleagues, there will be superiors, there will be subordinates who are basically aware of their misdeeds. So the question for us in this day as we commemorate this conference is, how do we deal with these dual personalities of perpetrators of corruption, who on the one hand, before their families and communities are social heroes, yet to we, the law enforcement agencies, they are criminals. How do we get the victims of corruption join the war and fight rather than praise the corrupt? Secondly, there are certain offenses of corruption like bribery, vis-a-vis the
So
work of
you have to summarize.
Let me just summarize this one in 1 minute, where you find that the whistleblower, when he reports a case of bribery, you discover during the course of investigations that the whistleblower actually was part of the deal, because bribery is about the willing giver and willing recipient. Now, when the deal goes sour and he doesn't get what he expected, he turns around to be the whistleblower. How then do we, as law enforcement agencies in the fight against corruption, deal with that situation to ensure that we create an enabling environment in which the scenes of crime that promote whistleblowing are basically are very clear? And how do we encourage and ably incentivize those who are willing to report the heinous crimes of corruption as whistleblowers? Thank you very much. Over and out.
Thank you very much, Dr. Patricia. Is it Achang? A-C-H-A-N-G? I didn't get the surname.
Dr. Patricia Achan Okiria.
Okiria. Okay, Achan Okiria. Thank you so much. That was multiple questions in two. But thank you for sharing. At this rate, I have trepidation about allowing people to ask questions because there are multiple questions in just one. But let me pick one more, and then I will go back to those who have assigned a few questions to. Chris, can you pick one more? So we have the two questions on the dual personalities of perpetrators who are going to church, being generous in communities. When you arrest them, their communities and families come after you. What do we do about that? And then what do we also do when the whistleblower himself or herself is part of the deal, and it's only when it goes sour, they run to you? What are we doing about that? What can we do about that? Great questions. Can we pick one more?
Okay, yes, we are going to Anna of CAACC. Kindly unmute. Anna, unmute, please. Okay, let me pick Adam of ATSOU. Adam?
Hello? Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you, Adam Achu.
En fait, ma première, merci de répondre pour D'accord, je disais merci beaucoup aux intervenants de par leur chacun sa participation. La question pour moi, j'ai une problématique, c'est-à-dire que dans les pays africains qui ont ratifié la Convention de la lutte contre la corruption, on a l'impression que ces instances qui sont implémentées au niveau de chaque pays africain, c'est le pouvoir en place qui les met. C'est une question politique. Est-ce qu'on peut parler de corruption sans se référer à la gestion des fonds publics, à la gestion de comment le pays est géré? Est-ce que ces institutions-là sont vraiment indépendantes? Moi, je ne dirais pas au niveau de... Il y a plusieurs enquêtes peut-être dans mon pays qui sortent que, par exemple, l'organe chargé
de la lutte contre la corruption, le Al-Bushra, bon, ça reste dans les tiroirs. Bon, à un moment donné, c'est plus un problème politique. Des fois, même la corruption est utilisée comme un outil de répression politique pour certaines personnes. Donc, comme il y avait un des intervenants qui a parlé de la volonté politique, je pense que c'est le plus important. Hein. Si, par exemple, nos pays africains arrivaient à se doter vraiment d'organismes vraiment indépendants, maintenant, comment ces organismes seront vraiment indépendants pour que vraiment cette corruption soit vraiment... parce que c'est le mot, le mal qui gangrène vraiment notre Afrique. Merci.
Thank you very much, Adam Achu. Okay, so thank you. I'll take just these two for now, looking at the time. Let's go back to the questions I assigned. I'll start with Mrs. Sonika Nunku, looking at how we galvanize rural populations in terms of whistleblowing. After that, I'll come to Mrs. Chumina, looking at what the AUABC, I think Mr. Abdarada goes to Honorable Yakiti, is doing about the youth. And then the other one goes to Mrs. Inchumunya. So, Mrs. Sunika Nunku, your audience, thank you.
Thank you, Session Chair. Yeah, to create, the active participation of large rural African population, it is important how do we get them actively involved is through sustain what we call education or awareness sessions. It's only by going out to them, by explaining to them, what is whistleblowing, what are we whistleblowing about, what are the offenses, and what are the dangers of these particular offenses, how does it impact on society. If we don't go out and explain these to large rural population, they won't get actively participating in sharing our concern. Now, when we're talking about large rural population, we to get them engaged, we have to use their local language, and also we have to see, where these people get most information. Is it on Facebook, or do they go on national TV, national radio, or or other platform? So we have to choose. We have to use the platform that these people are currently using, so as to disseminate information about whistleblowing. For example, if they are on Facebook, we could do regular digital campaigns on Facebook. If they are, if they watch national TV or any other TV or radio, so regular campaigns, TV and media campaign, regular media campaigns should be conducted. If you allow me, I would like to react to one question that was raised by a participant who said that, what do we do when a whistleblower is an accomplice to a particular, has participated in the commission of a particular offense? For us, even though a whistleblower is an accomplice, until and unless they are granted immunity, they will be treated as suspects and can be prosecuted for the commission of the relevant offense. So when somebody has, and this is disseminated, this type of information is disseminated as part of our education campaigns. We draw the line, about when you are an informer, when you are a witness, and if you are an accomplice, what happens. So these type of issues are dealt with and are discussed during education sessions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And please, for all the panelists, if there's any other question you would like to speak to, please just pick it up like she just did and speak to it. At this point, I'm inviting Mrs. Inchumunya to look at how are young people responding? How would you rate the response of young people across Africa to this fight against corruption in general? And then I'll come to our honorable chairperson about what the AUABC is doing, especially in the light of what other organs across the globe are taking, what actions they are taking. Mrs. Sinchimunya, are you with us? Can you speak to how you'd rate young people's response to the fight against corruption?
Chair, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, this is Martha. The Executive Secretary has just boarded a flight coming back to Arusha, so she's airborne.
Okay, so Martha, you want to speak on her behalf?
Yes, I can do that with your permission, sir.
All right, please go ahead.
Yeah,
Please put your video on. Thank you.
It says I cannot start video because
okay, and Chris will give you permission.
It's
in
okay.
a second.
It's done. It's done.
Okay, thank you so much. Just to say that, yes, I think from the various interactions we have been having with member states, we see that there's a very big interest, a very huge interest from the youth to get involved in anti-corruption matters. And for example, most of the national anti-corruption authorities that we do engage with as a board, they have their national anti-corruption strategies. And in there, they have awareness programs, and most of them, they're targeting the youth. And from the conversation we have, it's always reported that the youth, they have even formed, for example, anti-corruption clubs, integrity clubs. We saw this in Zambia, in Tanzania, where in secondary schools and primary schools, in fact, they have these anti-corruption clubs where the youth do get engaged into anti-corruption programs, as well as even going out to sensitize other people about anti-corruption issues. And also, even at a continental level, AUCPCC, being a member of the Africa Governance Platform, we have our youth engagement programs at the continental level. And one of the topics on the governance issues is the issue of anti-corruption. And we've engaged with a number of youth. And even in 2018, when AUCPCC or African Union was celebrating the theme of the year on anti-corruption, we, through the Republic of Nigeria, we had come up with youth ambassadors, and there are 5 of them in the continent, and we do engage with them. But of course, over time, because of resources, we haven't managed to convene again the Youth Congress on anti-corruption. But it's something that we see having enough resources, we can be able even to replicate this even at member states level. So the interest is really there. And that's what I can say. Thank you.
Thank you, our technical officer, Martha Mutali, for sharing that response. Now I'm going to our chairperson, but I want to elect 2 people to pick up 2 questions that have come up. Mr. Mupigani, the issue of dual personalities of perpetrators. They are in church, they are generous in the community, they look gentle, and and then immediately our anti-corruption bodies, NACS and the rest get in, people, communities, chiefs begin to appeal. To the extent that sometimes even your own colleagues, your superiors, your subordinates all have an insight. They seem to know. And if you're not careful, you and your family become the targets. What do we do? If you can share some thoughts after our honored chairperson has spoken. And then there's the issue of multiple cycles of investigations by anti-graft institutions, and yet the findings are never reported. Obviously, because to a certain extent, they are compromised, they are not as independent as we would expect. And so we really are not getting traction. How do we deal with that? And I will bring this to the attention of Gemma May. Gemma May, if you share your thoughts on what do we do when we have these national institutions that are supposed to be anti-graft institutions to to investigate, but reports never come out. The findings are never there for us to, deal with, act on, and get results. What do we do about that? So please prepare your thoughts on that. At this point, can I kindly ask Honorable Chairperson Zainabo Diakité if she can share her thoughts on what the AUABC and AU is doing on youth and youth participation in this fight. Thank you.
Merci, monsieur le modérateur. Je crois avoir entendu une question parlant de ce que fait l'Union africaine et notre conseil donc dans cette problématique des lanceurs d'alerte. Alors, je voudrais commencer par dire que l'Union africaine, au niveau théorique, a adopté une convention. C'est cette convention donc, qui nous réunit aujourd'hui et a mis en place un organe. C'est l'organe que j'ai l'honneur de diriger. Alors, cet organe donc traduit la volonté de l'Union africaine à pousser les États, à pousser les populations à une prise de conscience donc de la lutte contre la corruption et par ricochet des lanceurs d'alerte. Dans mon exposé ce matin et dans l'exposé de Madame la secrétaire exécutive, nous avons toutes les deux cité l'article 5 de la Convention qui parle de la protection des lanceurs d'alerte. Donc, si on a mis en place cet organe, c'est pour que cet organe soit la voix de l'Union africaine, la voix de la Commission de l'Union africaine au plan africain. Nous avons mené beaucoup d'activités. Il y a des activités statutaires en termes d'évaluation, en termes donc de rencontres. Et il y a également des activités qui poussent les gens à une prise de conscience, notamment le dialogue. Le dialogue, donc, nous comptons d'ailleurs organiser les jours qui viennent à Arusha, qui a été reporté. Et donc, dans ce volet-là, l'Union africaine, Marshall l'a rappelé tout à l'heure, le Conseil fait beaucoup d'activités. Parce que nous, ce qu'on a compris, c'est qu'il faut dès le bas âge inculquer aux jeunes la culture du rejet de la corruption, la culture de l'intégrité. Que les jeunes grandissent avec l'idée que la corruption est un fléau, que la corruption gangrène nos économies, ainsi de suite, ainsi de suite. Et c'est ce qu'elle vient de rappeler, Martha, en ce qui concerne donc les ambassadeurs de l'Union africaine. Nous sommes en train de réfléchir sur la possibilité de demander aux États d'inclure dans les curricula, au niveau des écoles, au niveau des universités, la corruption, les pratiques assimilées, et particulièrement les lanceurs d'alerte. Voilà donc ce que nous sommes en train de faire, en rappelant qu'il s'agit d'un domaine très difficile et qu'il y a un aspect des lanceurs d'alerte que nous n'avons pas abordé, difficile à aborder, c'est l'intéressement de ces lanceurs d'alerte. Comment les intéresser? Un orateur tout de suite a parlé du fait qu'il y a des lanceurs d'alerte qui dénoncent parce qu'ils n'ont pas reçu leur part, excusez-moi le terme, leur part du gâteau. Alors, que faire pour les encourager financièrement? Là également, je pense que c'est une question qui mérite réflexion et qui pourrait nous aider pour mieux appréhender la problématique qui nous réunit aujourd'hui. Merci, monsieur le modérateur.
And thank you very much, our chairperson. Thank you very much. Great. So we come back to the dual personality of perpetrators. Mr. Mupigani, are you able to share some thoughts on that? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. But before I respond to this question, I had raised my hand to react a bit on the other issue when the whistleblower is involved in the corruption practice. Can I share one thought on this, Chair?
Absolutely. Please proceed.
Yeah, this is a long debate in the anti-corruption sector in general, dear participants. And I want to really share the experience of Rwanda. We have in many research showed how the reporting is very, very low. And the law, anti-corruption law in Rwanda was, as others law, punishing on the same level the receiver and the giver of the bribe. And it was not giving the room for those who want to report to come to report. Just to give you an example why someone can really be not prosecuted. Sometimes when you report, when there is corruption, for some people it's a matter of life or death. Let's give you an example. A mother wants to give birth in a hospital, and she's asked $10. If she does not give such money, she will not be treated. So if she gives that money to be treated and she reports, will it be prosecuted? This is the example. The other example is someone who needs to travel and needs urgently his passport. He is requested the money to get the passport, and he gives the money, but immediately he reports or she reports. Will it be prosecuted as well? So the Rwandan law, the anti-corruption law, has really shifted the paradigm. In Rwanda anti-corruption law, even though you have paid bribe, but if you take you report immediately before the investigation starts, you are not prosecuted. This helps to really encourage people who are victims of corruption and do not have any choice to at least to report the cases and prosecute the perpetrator. This is the experience of Rwanda that I want to share in regard to the punishment of corruption crime. Coming to the question, dual personality of perpetrator and of course versus the whistleblower. I think this is the profile of corruption perpetrators. They try to we call it. They try to buy the moral of the ordinary communities. We call it the moral corruption. I think to address this issue of this so-called opinion leader in the community, I think the solution would be the name and shame practice. If a so-called model or opinion leader in the community is prosecuted or investigated on corruption cases, it is very important for the anti-corruption enforcement agencies to explain the general public what happened, and there the mindset change on the perception on what they knew on that person and what is really is practicing. So this somehow the practice which is done here in Rwanda. But if you keep quiet, you don't tell to the general public what happened, of course, each and everyone will use what the perception he has on the person, and some of them will come to defend the suspects. So this is what I had to add on this situation, which is not an easy one in our communities. Thank you, Chair.
And thank you very much, Mr. Mopingan. Now we go back to Mrs. Sanika Nunku. Or did I give it to Gemame? I think I gave it to Gemame. Multiple cycles of investigation, and yet we don't get anything out of it. What are your thoughts?
I think it is such a tricky question. And I think it's something that we are all kind of grappling with daily, with these sort of compromised agencies and how we deal with it, how we deal with investigations not really leading anywhere. I think the first thing we need to do is figure out why. Why are they ineffective? Why are these investigations leading nowhere? Is it an issue that they need, strengthening in terms of capacity and funding? Is that kind of an issue? Or as the person who asked the question suggested, is it that they are actually complicit in the corruption at some level, or they have something at stake? And so there's a kind of bottlenecking happening there. And I think, you know, how we approach it will depend on the answer to that question of what is actually the problem. But again, if it's an issue of being complicit, of being involved and having something at stake, so not wanting to take things where they need to be taken, it's a systemic issue. And in that way, we need to be promoting reforms for effective oversight and monitoring of these bodies. And that can be through, you know, the establishment of independent authorities, by enforcing robust access to information laws, and even something like, you know, enforcing ethics training within the departments themselves. But there's also then a role here where we can, again, look at a collaborative approach, and the approach that civil society can assist in this as well, by really, you know, these organizations that promote transparency and accountability do an excellent job at acting as the watchdogs for these kinds of institutions. And so that's something that we can also bolster, as well as looking at the kind of systemic reform, is empowering these organizations to really excel in what they're good at. And then another, you know, I mean, maybe we need whistleblowers in these institutions. We need people to actually speak out as to what is causing the problem. And if it is an issue where the investigation has gone nowhere, or is taking too long, and it's the result of a whistleblower disclosure, there's also then something important that we can add into any kind of whistleblower legislation, which is a report back mechanism, right? So these institutions will be obliged to report back to the whistleblower on their findings. And if that means that they aren't pursuing it, they have to give good reason why. And that information will then make all of the other avenues slightly easier, you know, when it comes to access to information or watching over these institutions. So I think in short, it's a very difficult task, and it's something we're seeing across the continent, and it extends beyond these institutions, but it's something we need to grapple with in this collaborative approach.
Thank you, Gemma. Before you run away, and thank you. I mean, I like the idea of the feedback to whistleblowers, so that we know what is going on and we don't just have silence. Things we need to grapple with. There's also this question about when the whistleblower gives information to the media or to a journalist, and then that journalist takes advantage, abuses the trust of the whistleblower, and uses the information to solicit a bribe from the offending party or institution. What do we do? I know that you represent whistleblowers, so tell us, have you faced that? What can be done when it is the media or the journalist who is taking advantage of the information to enriching themselves within this process? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think that this is kind of something that I was mentioning about PLAF acting as this shield between journalists and whistleblowers, and it's for this exact reason. I mean, it doesn't even have to go so far as the journalist taking advantage for a bribe or something, you know. It can also just be them misrepresenting the information because it benefits them in some way. And so I think that, you know, there need to be consequences for that. It needs to be something that we can hold journalists to account for. I think, you know, we are fortunate that for the most part, our journalists are ethical. And so I think, you know, we have to keep holding them up to that level. But then it does also necessitate that when whistleblowers approach the media, which is often not the first port of call, you know, there are other channels that they are required to report through first, depending on the framework. But when whistleblowers do approach the media, it's important that they have other support and other protections with them to make sure that that doesn't happen, to make sure that agreements are signed with the media in terms of how the information will be used, what happens if it is used for these kinds of reasons, and so on. So I think, yeah, it's to have that protection with the whistleblower themselves, and then also to hold our journalists to account. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on that. So we are in the wrapping up moments. I will not be able to take many more open questions, but I'm going to pick a few from the box, and I'm going to ask our chairperson. The first has to do with rewards for whistleblowers. Is that something we think is important? Should we be incentivizing whistleblowers? And is the AU or AUCPCC thinking about a reward fund? Mr. Stephen Azantilo of Ghana asked that question. So is reward something we should be thinking about for whistleblowers? I'll ask our honorable chairperson, and are there any plans to have something like that in place? And then the second one, which I think has to do much more with our framework, is what do we do when we have member state leaders who are not creating the enabling environment by allowing the necessary legal frameworks to be established? There's been a number of questions on that. I guess that these participants came in early because the AUCPCC, as we indicated under Articles 5.5, 5.6, and 5.8, obligate member states to put in place laws, legislation that protects whistleblowers. So the convention provides that context. However, whether member states will actually do so, and I think that the presentation from Transparency International, Mr. Mupiganyi of Rwanda, a very detailed picture of which countries have passed these laws, and the many more that have not yet passed these laws. And in terms of the status of whistleblowing in Africa. So the question here is there any scope for action? Is there any sanction outlined? Is there anything we can do as AUCPCC, as Africans, as nation states, when our leaders refuse to go down the road of putting in place the necessary legal framework that we can deal and protect whistleblowers and ensure that we create an environment where it is, uncomfortable for people who want to engage in graft and corruption. So those are the two questions. One, is there need to incentivize whistleblowers? Embedded in that, are we considering a reward fund for Africa? Do we have any proposals? And then secondly, is there anything we can do about member state leaders who do not make the effort to put in place the necessary legal architecture? Madam Chair, over to you.
Merci beaucoup, monsieur le modérateur. Je pense que moi-même, j'ai évoqué tout de suite cette question, parlant de la motivation aux lanceurs d'alerte. Comme membre de ce conseil, vous savez les difficultés auxquelles nous sommes confrontés en termes financiers, en termes de budget. On aurait bien aimé pouvoir le faire. Ça se fait ailleurs, surtout ce qu'on appelle les champions de la lutte contre la corruption et qui ne sont pas des chefs d'État. Mais malheureusement, compte tenu de nos moyens, il nous est à présent difficile donc de pouvoir tenir cette promesse. Malgré tout, nous sommes sensibles à cette proposition. Je l'ai dit moi-même tout à l'heure. Et nous allons, avec nos partenaires et l'Union africaine, voir les modalités de renforcer nos capacités financières en vue de satisfaire donc les lanceurs d'alerte et de les encourager. Je pense que c'est très important. Tout le monde l'a souligné ici, ils risquent leur vie, ils risquent la vie de leur famille, ils risquent même de perdre des emplois parfois. Donc, il est important de pouvoir les motiver. La question est de savoir comment le faire, quels moyens pour le faire. Je pense que la réflexion est ouverte. Merci, monsieur le modérateur.
Thank you. I don't know whether you looked at I dropped off briefly. I don't know whether you cover the issue of the leaders of member states who don't work, as it were, to pass legislation that protects whistleblowers. Is there anything we can do from the AUCPCC or from the AUABC's point of view?
Merci beaucoup, monsieur le modérateur. Je voudrais simplement rappeler, comme vous le savez, qu'on est au niveau de l'Union africaine dans un domaine très délicat, très sensible, c'est le domaine de la diplomatie. Et le Conseil que nous dirigeons n'a aucun moyen de contrainte vis-à-vis d'un État. Même les autres organes n'ont pas de moyen de contrainte. Ce que nous pouvons et devons faire, c'est continuer à mener nos actions de sensibilisation. Rappeler aux États qu'ils se sont engagés eux-mêmes en signant ces traités, en signant cette convention, et que par respect pour leurs engagements, ils devraient pouvoir respecter toutes les dispositions de la convention, parmi lesquelles donc la protection des lanceurs d'alerte. Et ça commence, comme on l'a dit depuis ce matin, par la mise en place d'instruments juridiques en termes de textes, de réglementation, pour protéger les lanceurs d'alerte. Ça, c'est le premier pas. Maintenant, pour le reste, en dehors de cette volonté politique, c'est l'engagement de l'État lui-même. Son engagement à pouvoir respecter les dispositions. Son engagement à lutter contre la corruption. Par le biais, entre autres, de la mise en place de textes qui protègent les lanceurs d'alerte. Mais vous le savez, ce n'est pas facile pour la raison que je viens d'évoquer. Et pour une autre raison évidente, les États ont également leur agenda, leurs préoccupations. Mais nous continuons à les sensibiliser. Nous pensons que l'impossible n'est pas de ce monde. Il y a eu beaucoup d'exemples où des hommes et des femmes ont permis à ce qui était considéré comme impossible de se réaliser. Espérons qu'un jour, notre projet pourrait se réaliser. Merci.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson. And we have come to the end of our webinar. I want to thank everybody. I'm going to just note that in addition to our Honorable Chairperson's comments on what we can do, evidently AUABC is working with all partners. So if there are civil society and other groups that need some support in terms of raising these issues, whatever we can do, we'll continue to do, just to make sure that the environment to promote the fight against corruption continues to exist and that whistleblowers can be protected. On this note, I'd like to kindly bring our session to an end, and I will be calling upon our Honorable Chairperson to give us a vote of thanks and the way forward. It's been an absolute privilege moderating this session. My name is Honorable Edem Senanu from Ghana, and thank you for your attention. Honorable Chairperson, over to you to wrap up for the day.
Merci beaucoup, monsieur le modérateur. Mesdames et messieurs, nous voilà donc à la fin de nos travaux. Pendant 2 heures, nous avons échangé et discuté sur un thème très important, à savoir la protection des lanceurs d'alerte. Nos discussions nous ont permis d'identifier qui peut être considéré comme lanceur d'alerte, et de rappeler l'importance des lanceurs d'alerte dans la lutte que nous menons, c'est-à-dire la lutte contre la corruption. Mais nos discussions nous ont également permis d'identifier des défis, les défis auxquels nous sommes confrontés, et de proposer des solutions pour relever ces défis. Les principaux défis, les intervenants l'ont rappelé, sont de nature législative, juridictionnelle, culturelle, etc., etc. Comment parvenir à les surmonter? Nous sommes tous d'accord que la sensibilisation est assez importante. La prévention est assez importante. D'ailleurs, si la prévention réussit, on n'aura plus à lutter contre la corruption. Je voudrais sincèrement présenter mes remerciements à tous les intervenants, aux panélistes, Transparency International, Pilar, Île Maurice, etc., etc. Je pense que nos discussions ne devraient pas s'arrêter là. Nous devons continuer. Nous devons continuer nos échanges au cours des rencontres. Et je pense que la prochaine, ce sera le dialogue qui était prévu, malheureusement, qui n'a pas pu se tenir, mais qui sera tenu dans les semaines à venir à Arusha. Le dialogue que nous organisons annuellement pour échanger. Et je pense que ce sera l'occasion encore de poursuivre les discussions sur ce point. Je voudrais remercier également mon collègue Senanou pour la bonne modération de nos travaux. Encore une fois, il a démontré avec pertinence sa capacité à faire le travail qu'on lui a confié au niveau du Conseil. Merci, chers collègues. Je remercie les collègues qui se sont joints à nous. Je remercie également tous ceux qui ont participé en ligne à ce webinaire. Je voudrais enfin remercier les interprètes qui nous ont permis de nous comprendre, de mener à bien ces travaux. J'espère que l'année prochaine, lorsqu'on aura à célébrer la journée africaine de lutte contre la corruption et qu'on se rappellera de ce qui a été discuté aujourd'hui, on réalisera que beaucoup de progrès ont été faits. En tout cas, c'est mon souhait le plus urgent et je sais que c'est le souhait de tous ceux qui ont participé à ce webinaire. Je l'ai dit tout à l'heure, continuons à nous battre, ne laissons pas les bras. Nous n'avons pas l'intention, certes, d'éradiquer la corruption, mais nous pouvons participer à la réécriture de l'histoire. Le jour où on parlera de la lutte contre la corruption, de la mise en place des lois sur les lanceurs d'alerte, nous tous pourrions dire très haut que nous avons écrit quelques pages de l'histoire du Conseil consultatif et à travers le Conseil de l'histoire de l'Afrique qui lutte contre la corruption. Encore une fois, merci à vous tous et bon après-midi et bonne soirée selon que vous vous trouvez en Afrique de l'Est ou en Afrique de l'Ouest. Merci beaucoup et au revoir. La séance est levée.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Merci,
Thank
au
you.
revoir.
Thank you.
Merci.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. And bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Merci,
Thank you.
au revoir.
Yeah, thank you very much.
À bientôt.
Au revoir, à bientôt.